Nintendo has been making great platformers since their very first console, and they've only been getting better since. And Donkey Kong games are responsible for some of the greatest among all of the platformers they have ever produced. The Donkey Kong Country games on the SNES brought platformers to a new level, and when Donkey Kong Country Returns was released on the Wii after a long time without a Donkey Kong Country game, it was a triumphant return for the series with lots of hope for what was to come in the future. Luckily, 4 years later, the next entry in the Donkey Kong Country series was released in the form of Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, and this game was arguably the best one in the series. Unfortunately, it was released on the Wii U. Donkey Kong games don't get enough credit. Almost every entry in the series is one of the best on their respective consoles, although it seems that they usually get overshadowed by Mario games because, well, he's just Mario. For example, Donkey Kong Country Returns was probably the best platformer on the Wii, but New Super Mario Bros. Wii was much more popular. But now, on the Switch, when Donkey Kong has fewer games to compete with, this is the perfect time for it to shine. Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze definitely takes a lot of inspiration from Mario games, but it is able to take that formula and make so much more out of it. The levels in this game are just simply amazing. Usually in Mario games, each world has a theme, and every level in that world basically functions the same, just with a little bit of variety. But what Donkey Kong does so well is using that same theme throughout the world, but each level uses that theme in a different style, which really makes every level stand out and makes them all a blast to play. It's more than just the theme of the levels though. Mario games are known for having certain gimmicks in their levels that progressively get more difficult as you get further through the level, and Donkey Kong does this too, but in a much better way. Each level starts out simple, but the obstacles and challenges start to become presented in new and oftentimes more dangerous ways as you progress through the level. This continues to build the tension until you reach the final checkpoint and eventually make it to the barrel at the end. And let me tell you, reaching that barrel is such a great feeling when you're finally able to reach that level with pride and smack that barrel until there's nothing left of it. Each world usually has 2 or 3 more unique styles of levels in them too. The 3 formats usually for these levels are minecart levels, rocket barrel levels, and Rambi the Rhinoceros levels. These levels are always unique and are some of the best in the game. They make you play the game in a whole new way, which really adds to the already great level design that the game has. But seriously, the design of these levels are great, but they may also be some of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in a 2D platformer. Like, just look at this. I swear, this is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in a video game. Not to mention, they're all accompanied by an amazing soundtrack. If you've ever played other Donkey Kong Country games, you would know that Donkey Kong usually gets a little help from his nephew Diddy, who, by the way, is a great character. Diddy Kong has been a great element in these games because he acts as a power-up by giving you 2 extra hearts, but you can also use his jetpack, which lets you float in the air for longer than you're usually able to. However, in Tropical Freeze, Donkey Kong can now receive help from Dixie Kong and Cranky Kong, along with Diddy Kong. And I think this was a great decision because in most levels, you can choose which one you want, which lets you play the game however you want because they all have different skills they can offer you. However, this is also one of my few complaints with the game, and it really isn't a big deal, but because they all have different skills, they're a little bit unbalanced. Cranky Kong allows you to bounce on spikes with his cane, but I found this not to be very useful for many levels. Sure, it will make some levels easier, but Cranky really doesn't help out with much more besides giving you 2 extra hearts. Then there's Diddy and Dixie. I've already stated what Diddy does, and Dixie's skill is very similar. She allows you to hover in the air with her ponytail, which also helps you gain some height as well, so when comparing these 2 skills, they're pretty much the same, except for the fact that Diddy helps you gain height. So Diddy is pretty much useless. This is a problem for me because I feel like this idea wasn't fully utilized, because I ended up using Dixie for most of the game, and this isn't a huge deal, but a problem like this really feels out of place in such a great game. But back to the positives though. Another thing I really like in this game is how the collectibles function. In games like Mario, coins are really the only collectible, and they feel pretty useless when collecting them. but I never felt this way in Tropical Freeze. The bananas are most comparable to coins, but they actually have purpose in this game. Once you collect enough of them, you can charge up your special attack, and if you have Diddy, Dixie, or Cranky, when you use it, it gets rid of every enemy on the screen and turns them into items. I never use this very much, but it's a cool detail to have nonetheless. The other collectibles are puzzle pieces and banana coins. Puzzle pieces are found by solving little puzzles or reaching secret areas in the level. These only unlock some secret art, but are fun to find throughout the levels, and the banana coins are my favorite because they're usually just in plain sight, but they force you to take a more difficult path if you want to get them. These can also be spent in the shop to buy things, and I think that's a really cool thing that they implemented into the game. Now, I've talked about how good this game is, but I haven't mentioned how hard it is, because this is a very hard game that will have you trying to beat certain sections over and over. I really like this about it though, especially the bosses. The bosses in this game are some of the best and hardest in any video game. They're much more than just jumping on the boss's head 3 times like how it works in most Mario games. These bosses require to hit them probably about 5 to 9 times before you can actually beat them. And the boss fights go in different phases too, the farther you get in them. And they often push your skills to the limit as they make you memorize and determine the best strategies for each phase of the boss fight. However, if you're not a fan of the overly difficult game, there is a much funkier option. Up to this point, Tropical Freeze on Switch has pretty much been identical to the Wii U version, but the biggest change in the game comes in the form of new Funky mode. In this mode, you play only as Funky Kong. Funky is far too funky to need any actual help, because he basically has all of their skills rounded up into one. He can hover in the air like Dixie Kong and Diddy Kong, and he even has a double jump and can even land on spikes with no issues because of his surfboard. Wait, all it takes is a surfboard to be saved from spikes? That kind of makes me wonder why every video game doesn't have a surfboard at this point. But in all seriousness, Funky mode is just a glorified easy mode and doesn't offer much more than that. And while I do think that it is good that Tropical Freeze can appeal to wider audiences, I think Funky Kong kinda takes away from the brilliance of the game. Funky Kong's funkiness unfortunately allows you to skip a lot of the very well designed sections of the game, and takes away from the level design that was clearly well thought out and not meant for this kind of playstyle. But those issues aren't a big deal, and I'm still glad that Funky mode is in the game. So now, the question I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, is Tropical Freeze worth buying again if you already owned it for a Wii U? Well, for those people who actually bought a Wii U? Well, Funky mode is really the only new thing added, and unless it was too hard for you on the Wii U, or you want to experience it again on the Switch, I would say that it's probably not worth it if you've already played through the whole game. But if you've never played this game, then I cannot recommend it more that you play it. It is simply amazing, and that is why I'm giving Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze for the Nintendo Switch a 9.8 out of 10, and I would put it among some of my favorite games of all time. Thank you all for watching, like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.